Ukraine, the country full of beautiful fields, amazing cities, and tank carcasses. In the past year and a half, we have seen hundreds and even thousands of destroyed tanks in the biggest war in Europe since World War II. But there is one tank that hasn't been destroyed, and many have suggested that it's one of the best unknown tanks in the conflict. But this tank would face the worst luck I've ever seen of any engineering project. Today we'll be talking more about the most protected tank in the world made to defend Ukraine and revive the famous Ukrainian tank factory that made the legendary T-34. This is the Ukrainian bulwark, the T-84 Oplot M. The story of the T-84 actually starts way back in the USSR. The T-80 was a brilliant tank for the era. Powered by a gas turbine instead of a standard diesel engine, it was fast, maneuverable, and had great potential. But the engine was also famous for one other thing: fuel consumption. Consuming up to 700 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers, and yes, you've heard that right, 700 liters, made its range rather limited compared to any other Soviet tank. And with the death of the defense minister, Dmitry Ustinov, in 1984, the design was then switched to a diesel engine. You see, Dmitry was a big fan of the gas turbine, but with him out of the picture, there was no one there left. The production was moved to another variant called the T-80UD, and it was made in today's Ukraine in the city of Kharkiv. And I hope I've said that right this time, because I know on the last story I did about a tank factory in Kharkiv, everybody was quite upset with the way I pronounced it. You see, the Kharkiv tank factory was the one behind the legendary T-34, T-64, and would now build the diesel-powered T-80UD. But it seems the program couldn't get a break because around the same time we had the fall of the Soviet Union, and the whole endeavor was left in a really precarious position. You see, the cast turret for the tank was actually made in Russia, and that was a big problem. Ukrainian engineers soon proposed to make a new upgraded variant of the tank with a completely new welded turret. They didn't have to rely on their former overlords. The first prototype was based on the T-64 chassis and called in a very Soviet manner Object 478DU, and the other one was based on the T-80 chassis and called the DU-2. Of course, the T-80 base modernization soon proved to be much superior, and the Ukrainians had the idea to create a new tank which could use all the unassembled chassis from the Soviet area and down the line, and continue production of new tanks for either the Ukrainian army or for export. But Ukraine wasn't exactly in a good shape in the 90s. Corruption destroyed the country and the military from the inside, and such a project wasn't started in Massey. But they persevered, and after several DU-4 prototypes, a new tank finally was created, with a new name, the T-84, and in 1999 we had the spectacular reveal. But it's one thing to just make a tank, the next part is finding a buyer, and they would look to their south, to Turkey. Turkey wanted new tanks, and a competition was organized in 1999 to choose between the Leopard 2A6, Abrams, and the T-84 Yataghan. And this tank would be a step in a completely new direction for the Ukrainians, because it would need to accommodate NATO rounds. It would have a new 120mm gun with a completely new angulated turret with blowout panels, and a new Western autoloader that eliminated the ammunition from the tank itself, a well-known issue with the Soviet design. It would also get a new transmission with a new engine, giving it much better reverse speed, and it also got a new modernized fire control system and night vision along with the Ukrainian version of a passive defense system. This would make it a very good tank. But you guessed it, crisis would strike again. In 1999, Turkey was hit by a catastrophic earthquake, leaving some 20,000 people dead, and there was no money for new tanks. To cut down on costs, Turkey opted for the old Leopard 2A4s and the T-84 lost the battle. But it wouldn't lose the war. Now, by this point in the story, you gotta wonder if this really is the most unluckiest tank project you've ever heard of, and the engineers who building it certainly thought so as well, but they didn't want to give up on their new shiny tank and they made another variant, cheaper and now for the Ukrainian army needs. It got a new name, the T-84U, or sometimes known as the T-84BM Oplot. This tank abandoned the autoloader and the turret design from the Yataghan, but instead followed a cheaper and simpler turret design of the Russian T-90A, however with Ukrainian KBA-3 125mm gun. The engine was also updated again with better transmission and some 30 km/h in reverse, and they also took the chance to update it with reactive armor developed in the early 2000s by the local Ukrainians. Unlike standard reactive armor with explosive plates which upon activation explode towards the projectile, the Ukrainian version was shaped like a crescent with an explosive breaking the top thin layer, which created a sort of knife that would cut through the projectile. A brilliant solution. 10 of these tanks entered service in the early 2000s, but 4 were sold to the United States for testing and exercises. And yet again the whole project was paused because there was no money for new tanks for the Ukrainian army. Flash forward to 2009, new year, and new T-84 variant. Called the Oplot M, this is the ultimate variant of the T-84 tank, the main topic of our video today. Further modifications were made to the T-84U to create probably the best protected tank in the world, and yes, you've heard me right. First of all, they took that amazing reactive armor and layered it 3 times on the turret and 2 layers on the front of the tank. This gave the new tank better armor coverage than any Russian tank, but even more than the Western tanks like the Leopard 2 or the M1A2, rivaling only the Challenger 2 and the Russian T-90M. But even those tanks still have their engine exposed, unlike the Oplot. As part of the upgrades, they also put in some amazing panoramic sights, giving the crew a hunter-killer capability and a second-generation French thermal imaging sensor with a range of up to 5 kilometers. Along with that, the tank is also equipped with the Ukrainian version of a passive protection, which made it easy to defeat laser-guided ATGMs, as well as automatically firing smoke launchers when it's detected that the tank is painted by laser targeting. And you know that this engine also got an upgrade, with the Oplot able to go up to a maximum speed of 70 km/h and 31 in reverse, which is comparable to the Leopard tank. Lastly, they also decided to move the ammunition to an external blowout panel on the back of the turret to improve safely, but the tank did have to keep its old T-80 autoloader as the previous variants. All in all, the Oplot M is an amazing tank, better than any Russian tank other than the T-90M. So why haven't we seen it in combat, and why wasn't it mass produced? In 2011, the Ukrainian army signed a deal with Thailand as the first buyer of the Oplot M to sell 49 tanks. This was great news for the engineers, and they went on to sign another deal for infantry fighting vehicles in 2012. The future was bright, and then the war came. Ukraine had huge issues with corruption throughout the years. Oligarchs, mafia and corrupt politicians happened to the military-industrial complex, with the Oplot Bureau, the KMDB, being no exception. The first issues started in 2013 when the Iraqis returned the first batch of BTR-4 infantry carriers because of numerous quality-related issues, along with corrosion of the metals. Then in 2014, war would come to Donbass, and they found themselves out of luck when lots of parts of the Oplot built in Crimea were taken by the Russians. Later years saw a struggle on all fronts with tanks that were not made, and Thailand was getting angry and even threatened to cancel its contract in 2017. But somehow the engineers pulled it together and managed to deliver all vehicles by 2018. Feeling confident, the Ukrainians decided to participate in a tank strong challenge with their older TA-4U and failed miserably. Numerous issues with the tank plagued the crews throughout the competition, and Ukraine ended up in the last place. And all of these problems severely affected the image of both the tank and the manufacturer, and there were no more future orders. Only several Oplot Ms would ever be delivered to the Ukrainian armed forces by 2022, and as we know, the terrible war would then start with Russia with its invasion of Ukraine. Since then, Oplots were only ever seen sporadically in videos here and there, and never saw mass combat like the BTR-4 troop carriers or older Ukrainian tanks, finding itself on the sidelines. One of the first variant Oplots was actually hit by a Russian Lancet drone and damaged, but it was probably survived and was returned for repairs. But the Oplot M dream still remains a distant wish. So what's the future of the Oplot M? It's hard to say with the war still going. They're probably not sent to the front line because they will eventually get destroyed like any other tank, and there are so few of them made. The Ukrainians did a fantastic job in creating their new tank, and it had a prosperous future, but corruption, war, and simply bad luck had other plans for the Ukrainian bulwark. Nevertheless, it remains one of the best looking tanks today, the best evolution of the T-80 tank, and a monument to the engineers working on the project throughout the years. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to subscribe and follow us for more interesting videos. We'll be doing some more legendary tanks in the future in Ukrainian vehicles as well. Stay safe and see you in the next video.